We're here on the grid for the Season 9 Monaco Grand Prix. On pole position is Rory for Red Leicester, his first pole position in Formula I and that team. Second place on the grid, Steven for Think Again. Third, Alba, who won this race last season. She's in fourth place is Will in the Tiamat, the two-time champion. Fifth place is Naifu in the Bridge. Sixth is Matt for Neutrino, an incredible result for him. Seventh is Greg, our defending champion. And eighth is Yui. Ninth, Hisham. 10th, Kevin. 11th, Mac. 12th, Matty. 13th, Chris R. 14th, Michael. And Tom D in 15th place. So, ready to roll D alongside him. Who is going to be first into the first corner? It's so critical here, as overtaking is very difficult. A lot of this race is going to be decided now. Looks like a good getaway from Steven, but no, actually, the Frozen Light is pulling alongside. Doesn't manage to make it, and indeed almost concedes to Will, turn one. But it is Naifu who has made up place. So Will has actually dropped back one. Matt remains in 6th. Yui 7th, and she has got past Greg, our defending champion. Continuing his great... So let's have a closer look at that start. Here's Alba, and it did... The two cars in front did roughly get similar starts, with Steven getting perhaps a slightly better one, but he had to back out, which nearly let Alba through. Here's how Naifu got past Will. It doesn't look effective anything, but slightly better start off. Ultimately, well, that's strange. Will had a very poor exit off of turn 1. Will was well ahead once he got to the corner, but he just didn't get the power down coming off it. As they come into the chicane, it's Rory who still leads by a second. Steven just Alba seemingly pulling away from Naifu. The gap spreading out further back, but it does seem like in the early stages of this race, Steven is the one that is struggling up front. But of course it's extremely difficult to pass here, and Alba's gonna have a hard time getting past that Think Again car. Rory starting the second lap then. Steven behind, holding the gap at just over a second for now. Alba right behind. We got the thing that's going to make this race interesting is going to be pit stop strategy. It's so hard to pass the track that it's all going to come down to who can gain an advantage in the pit stop. And if someone is running slowly at the start of the race, then you with more fuel on the LTA, and that's going to allow Alba to try and challenge into the tunnel. But Alba can't quite get past. It's very close there, and Steven has lost a lot of time as a result of that small mistake. Further half a second down on Rory now. Rory has never won Formula I race, and this is going to be a real test for him today. There are a few races where the pressure is higher here. It's double points, and if you make one mistake, then you're in the barriers and your race is actually over. Rory sets the fastest lap at the end of lap 2. He was a driver that had a bad start and seems to be continuing to drop off. It's Will. As in the background, Yui makes a small mistake, touching the outside wall. Don't want to do that too many times, but she seems to have got away with it. But yes, Will seems to be and Yui quite heavily at this point. Perhaps that's an indication that Will is carrying more fuel. We'll see if Will can go far enough into the race that he only needs to make one pit stop. But of course, that's going to be a big ask for the tyres to go that far as well. He's going to have to be very careful with them. You lose about 17 seconds if you make a pit stop here. When you make a pit stop, everyone will be doing at least one. Currently, Will is 5 seconds off Rory's lead, so Rory will be looking to make up about a 17, 18 second gap over Will, Matt, Yui. Don't think he'll get that far ahead of 3 in front of him. But he doesn't. If you're one of the leaders and you're running a light fuel strategy, start of the race, the critical with more fuel than you've made your first pit stop. So Rory, Stephen, Alba, Naifu, they've all got to go as fast as they can. I think Stephen might be a bit more fuel than others. Remains to be seen. Stephen actually gaining a bit of time in the first sector. Perhaps Stephen just taking a bit of time to get his tyres temperature. We'll see how that happens. Here's Matt coming into the Portier. Last corner before the tunnel, and he makes the same mistake that Stephen made. But unlike Alba, Yui manages to get past through the tunnel. Presumably outbreaks him around the outside, yeah. Matt didn't put up too much of a defense there. Obviously deciding it's not worth fighting too much this early on. Yui now up into 6th place. Another driver that seems to be going a bit more slowly in the early stages here is Greg. Champion. It's another driver that forced to see carrying more fuel. We won't know, of course, exactly how it got until we see when they make their first pit stops. Currently, Kevin, Hisham, Matty, Max, not so much Chris R, not so much Max to be honest. Certainly the 3 behind Greg. Close enough that you've got to think that they wouldn't be following that close unless they were much faster. It's quite hard, as Greg making a bit of a mistake on the exit of the hairpin. Gets away with it, very difficult to pass there. Very difficult to pass anywhere. Can Kevin get the slipstream down the tunnel? Does seem like the Vanox has good traction. If anything, Hisham is closer to Kevin. But no attempts. Rory continues to lead, but he's not really extending the gap anymore. Like, he pulled out 2 seconds in the first 2 or 3. It's staying about that now. Stephen seems to be much more comfortable with the car, though Alba is still following right behind. 4th place is Naifu. They're doing a good job, to be honest. Like, Naifu had a very mistake-filled season, I guess you'd call it, last time. And, like, honestly, she outqualified her teammate here. 16th place. She doesn't seem to be making any mistakes. Not too close to Alba, but, I mean, does she really need to be? It's the early stages. She's certainly within range of getting past if anything goes wrong in the pit stops. Currently running in 5th position is Will for Tiamat. He's driven for the Tiamat team for just nearly a season at this point. He moved from the Bean team over to the Tiamat midway through last season. It's been a pretty successful move for him so far, but he's still yet to win his first race for them. We'll see if that's going to happen here. He's currently 7 seconds off of Rory's lead. But that could, of course, be explained. And Yui is very close to the back of him at this point. But not close enough to challenge. Like I've said so many times, there's no harder track on the calendar to overtake than here. And it's definitely making Yui's life. We're definitely just waiting for the pit stops to happen at this phase of the race. Like, we're expecting to see the first people that are on a stop strat pit. Final 10 are on fuel, more likely around 30. But we might see the first people pitting fairly soon. Currently, if Rory was to pit, he would be racing around Max and Chris R. There's a lot of cars in like a small space in this train behind Greg. It's critical for Rory and for Steven and Alba that they don't come out when they make their pit. Here is Greg then. He's lapping about 1.5 seconds a lap off the pace of the leader. So at this rate, won't and won't come out in this train pit. And I'm guessing, just based on the sheer amount of pace that he's showing right now, that Rory is presumably two-stop, perhaps on the light end of fuel for a two-stopper. Whatever fuel load he's got, this has been a very impressive first stint. Rory's teammate, Stewart, is having very contrasting fortunes as Alex is out in the Pentagoron. Is that wheel going to hit anyone? It's rolling across the track, but everyone's gone through. Alex has crashed out of the Monaco Grand Prix. Let's see how that happened for Alex then. At the top of the hill, gets around the first segment alright, but through Casino Square has on team. This is Alex's first race of them, of course. And this is not the way he would have wanted to start. Rory's still leading the rest, but that's he's leading out to nearly 4 seconds, and he still hasn't come into the pits. Every lap that he does now, it just makes this more impressive, honestly. 10 laps is about what I would have guessed he had in terms of fuel, as I think Matty has got past Hisham for 10th place. Hisham making a mistake. That's where Alex went off, of course. And Matty taking advantage, moving up into 10th place. Will still holding 5th ahead of Yui. Matt has dropped off a bit from those two at this 1.3 seconds. Perhaps he's just conserving the tyres. Or perhaps they've started to fall off. In any case, he's definitely... With 10 laps completed, Rory still leads the race. Steven still just half a second ahead of Alba. That gap has been consistently tiny all race as we're having our first pit stops. So it's Matty who's come into the pits, 7.4 second stops, 7.4 second stop, I should say. And they are out behind Lee. So that's pretty much the last of those that depending on how much fuel they've put in there. We'll see. Tom D has also pitted, and he has a big gap of clear air ahead to Matty. Nearly 4 seconds. And Rory keeps going. Still not pitting. He now starts lap 12 of the Steven, Alba, Knifel, all continuing. Yui trying to get past Will on the outside of turn 1. Now trying to get past Will on the way up the hill. Neither can work. Will was putting all of his car in all of the right places, not leaving Yui an opening to get past. But of course, if Will makes one mistake, then Yui will be straight through. Of course, Will is a 2-time champion in Formula I, and he knows how to drive a car around the track. And it's tracks like this where that experience really counts. He's having to go defensive into the chicane against Yui. It's unnecessary. I don't think Yui was really close enough to challenge, but better safe than sorry. And he isn't really, despite having to take a slower line as that corner, he didn't really lose much time to Knifel. So I feel like Will's pace has picked up a bit as Alba comes into the pits, first of the leaders to stop. Not too surprised to see this, given that Alba looked like she was much quicker than Steven at this phase. But where is she going to come out? Is she going to be ahead of Greg? Critical thing. The gap was 21 seconds for the lead. Alba was about 4.5 off the lead. That implies that Alba was, as a slow stop, Alba's going to be well down. All of them behind. And behind Chris R, just ahead of Izzy, who's having to defend against Michael Zafonier. But that is Alba out in 12th position. That's not how she would have wanted that pit to go. 8.6 seconds. Frozen Light team will not be happy. To be honest, like, looking at this, Alba, even with a quick pit stop, would never have been ahead of Greg. But she should have been ahead of Greg. The gap, Greg, I think, is about. So, definitely would have been a tall order. Perhaps the time you need to make a pit stop is more like 20 seconds rather than 17. People come into the pits. Continue to stay out. It's Rory who leads. Now 6.3 seconds, Steven. Naifu has closed right up on Steven after Alba's made her pit stop. That's very interesting. Naifu was keeping a safe gap, like a second. Before Alba made her pit stop, perhaps Steven made a mistake that we didn't see, but it definitely looks like Naifu's picked up the pace and filled Alba's role as the driver that's putting Steven under pressure. Here's Lee in the pit lane, 6.8 second stop. Not bad, but nothing too amazing. Kier has also made their pit stop. And it is Rory who continues to stay out. Is it going to be this lap that he comes into the pits? Doesn't look like it. He stays out and continues extending that lead in what is turning into a very impressive race as Steven comes in. So Steven actually had less fuel in his car than I was not expecting that. I was fairly convinced that Steven was going on a one-stop strategy. Very unlikely that he's doing that, pitting from here. It's a very long way to the end, so it's definitely a two-stop from Steven. 8 second stop, not amazing. Good stops are like in the 6 seconds region. And Steven is out behind Greg at the very back of that train. Though critically, and presumably because of Alba ending up, as Max comes to a stop. Max is out in the frozen light. That looks like some kind of problem. Disaster for Max in his first race for Frozen Light. Frozen Light were really hoping that they could win this race like they did last season. Well, it's not going to happen with Max. It might still happen with Alba. Alba's race is definitely compromised with that pit stop, coming out behind Chris R. It remains to be seen exactly how far Chris R is going to go before he makes his pit stop. Or indeed, whether Alba can get past on the track. Alba's following very closely. She's got fresher tyres, much better car. If it's going to happen, it will happen now, as 3 of the leaders are coming into the pits. It's Yui, Matt, and Naifu. Naifu having quite a slow stop. Seeing a lot of slow stops here today. The train and Naifu comes out the pits ahead of Steven. So that is a position gain for Naifu then. And Naifu is now into a net 2nd place, assuming that everyone's making 2 pit stops. I think a lot of the people in front are only going to be making 1. Meanwhile, has come out of the pits in 14th place, right behind Callum. Well, those two have had an interesting history together in Formula I. They've been teammates. Back in Season 1, they were teammates. And Callum was definitely had the slight advantage over him, though as always, felt hard done by the fact that he was fired after getting his best result of the season, as Lee in the racing the transmission. Here is Lee, broken down at the Mirabeau, and the race wasn't going well for Racing Disappoint, it must be said, and that's just made it even worse, hasn't it? We're now on lap 17. We have to consider the possibility that Rory, despite his amazing pace, might only be making one pit stop. He's gone about 7 laps long, I expect this for, and it's an impressive run from the Red Leicester driver. Can Red Leicester take their first win here? It's looking more and more likely, though there's a long way to go, and Red Leicester had poor reliability last season. And Will is out. Will, in the Tiamat, crashed out. That's at the corner just before the tunnel. It's a very strange place to come out. Is that some kind of technical issue? Let's have a look what happened. So, Will coming out of the hairpin, going into the next corner, and then... Oh, I think that must be a technical. Because that's a very strange accident if he's just crashed out there. You don't normally see people make mistakes coming out of that corner. It's not one of the most difficult corners on this track. And it is a transmission failure, so Lee had. Extremely impressive first stint. We don't know whether he's 1 or 2 stopping. He completed 17 laps, but that's a lot of 9.4 seconds. To me, that implies that he's put a lot of fuel in and that he's only making 1 pit stop. He will still maintain the lead ahead of Greg. Quite a comfortable lead as well. That's got to be about 10 seconds. So, Rory, now with no more pit stops to make, I think, unless that was just an unusually slow stop, and he still holds the lead of this race. All he's got to do is stay there. It's very difficult to as long as Rory doesn't make a mistake, he is the strong favourite to win the Monaco Grand Prix. Here's a replay of Greg making a mistake, and that has let Kevin through in the Dancing Donkey car. Kevin now up into 2nd position. So that's a big error from Greg. All of these cars are probably 1 stopping, so that is a net gain for Kevin. If Greg's tyres are going off, and that could be the cause of that kind of mistake, as Kevin already pulling at a gap, we're going to be seeing Sham and, of course, Naifu and Steven, both of which have to stop again. So you've got to think that they'll overcut these two when they have to make their pit stop. Could be coming up very soon. Critical Kevin, because now if pull a gap of Greg before he makes his pit stop, at least 1 more lap, then that could put him into a position where he'll be ahead of Naifu and Steven after the stops. With Naifu and Steven being held up quite badly in that train behind Greg and Hisham. As Chris R comes into the pits, let's see how good a stop can Cheetah Racing do. It's looking alright. It's hard to tell. 9.1 seconds, definitely a 1-stop fuel load. And Chris R will come out in a lot of clear air, with Michael in the F1 air doing the same. So they're clear of Nathan, Matty, Izzy, who might have just made an overtake on Tom D, or that might have just been a defense. Keir and Callum. It's quite important for them. Definitely in a good position for some serious points here. Here we can see who has made their pit stops. So we've got Rory, Naifu, Steven, Alba, Yui, Matt, Chris R, all of which have made their stops. While Kevin, Greg and Hisham running long. To say that, Kevin comes into the pits. As does Hisham. So let's see where these two can come out. Of course, Naifu and Steven are going to have to stop again, you'd expect them to do it just before lap 30. And once Greg pits, they will be able to take advantage of their relatively light fuel loads and relatively fresh tyre. We want to pit as soon as possible, because the way things are going, Greg is seriously compromising the races of these three. And Rory is now 15 seconds of Naifu. And of course, Naifu still has to stop again. So Rory's pace in this race has been absolutely incredible. Red Leicester have been a backmarker team for most of their existence. Last season was the first time they produced a competitive car, and Rory made good use of it, as did Stewart, as Yui and Matt are battling. Let's see what that happens. So Yui coming through the Tabac corner, slides wide, touches the wall. That allows Matt to pull alongside into the swimming pool chicane. And they're still side by side, all the way through it. Matt getting very close to the wall there on the exit, but he makes it work. It's through into 6th place. Here's Stephen trying to get past Naifu. Doesn't work out this time. Naifu remains in 3rd position, as Rory is out of the race. Rory has crashed from a comfortable lead. Here we go. That is a disaster. The corner where we crashed before, it's earlier than where Alex went out. One corner before. Oh, we've seen so many people go out there, but all Rory had to do was keep it on the road, not make any mistakes. That's exactly what he has. Exactly what he's failed to do. And like I said earlier in the race, like, this is a race with so much pressure. It's double points, and if you make one mistake, like Rory's just, it can all be over. And so we've seen Rory out of the race. He will not take Red Leicester's first win. So that leaves Greg as our race leader, but Naifu is the first car that has made their pit stop. But of course, with every lap behind Greg, losing to the likes of Kevin and Hisham, Chris R even, all of which have made their one and only pit. None of which are probably setting amazing time, but they might be going faster than Greg on his old time. Saying that, Naifu isn't exactly all over the back at this point. It looks, if anything, like Stephen is putting Naifu under a lot more. Stephen has a look into turn 1. Doesn't work out. It is Greg who continues to lead this race. I think all of these 4 have to make another pit stop, though the 3 behind, as Greg makes a bit of a mistake, but Naifu is not close enough to capitalise. So Greg continues to lead, temporarily, here in Monaco. Greg can go, it must. The closer his pit stop is going to be to that of Naifu, Stephen, and as Stephen tries to make a move on Naifu. Naifu running it deep into the chicane, and almost losing out to Alba as well, but Alba actually gets passed by Matt. What's going on here? Let's have a look at the replay. So, Stephen not that close to Naifu. Naifu really braking very early for that chicane. Does Naifu have some kind of problem? Stephen wasting no time in getting past. Now Alba tries to get... Oh, Alba's had a technical problem. Alba is out. I thought that looked strange. And both have tired from the Season 9 Monaco Grand Prix. A disaster for Frozen Light. Like, they were, as I said earlier, they had serious expectations of competing for the win here, as Nathan is out as well. That looks like a suspension failure or something similar. You can see the back end of that car tilted over. He's parked it just about out of the way. Everyone should get around just fine. Now, Greg continuing to lead. And as I was going to say before all of that kicked off, Greg has to make one more pit stop. So do the 3 cars behind. So I think it's safe to say that Greg is our net leader. Of course, Steven, Naifu, and Matt may well chance to get past. And of course, we have Kevin, who has made his one and presumably only pit stop, and he's only 11 seconds off the lead. So I think Kevin will have the net lead into the closing pace. Steven is dropping back. Steven's got a technical problem. He's out. And Matt as well, in the neutrino. Matt's engine badly smoking. That's going to let Yui through into 3rd place as Greg finally comes into the pits. So all of the leaders are dropping like flies at this point. Now, Greg needs a good pit stop here, and he needs to come out not behind someone slow. That is a decent pit stop for a 1-stop fuel load, 7.5 seconds. Where's he going to be relative to Chris R, who I think has made his one and only pit stop? He's ahead of him. So that's critical. So I think that's a net 3rd. Kevin and Hisham, who will have very one towards the end of this race. See whether those two can hold on. So I do think that this race is going to be, as Matt still trying to get that car around the track, but I think that engine has probably had it. That's not the kind of problem that gets better with time, and eventually, I don't think it's going to be too much longer before we see Matt pulled off at the side of the road. But Kevin, running in 3rd place. He's made his pit stop. The 2 cars in front are on a 2-stop strategy. They're going to be very fast at the end of this one. But have they been held up too much by Greg to make this strategy work? I'm leaning towards yes, and I think if Naifu or Yui are going to win this round, they can take on Kevin, Hisham, maybe even Chris R on the track. And we've seen already how difficult that is. Not impossible, but very difficult. Here's Izzy, running in 8th place. I think on a 1-stop strategy. She had a bad qualifying. Definitely recovering decently in the race. On for a top 10 finish. Right behind her is Callum in the Racing Disappoint. And I think Callum has to stop again. Obviously, I'm not absolutely sure of this, but we'll only have to wait and see. Callum definitely looking like he's got a much quicker connect. Behind him is Keir, running in 10th. Tom D, having a disappointing race compared to his teammate, who currently leads the race. He's in 11th. So let's look at those gaps. We've got Naifu leading, 9 seconds ahead of Kevin, 14 seconds ahead of Hisham, 19.8 ahead of Greg. So it's going to be very close between Naifu and Greg. Once pit stops happen, Naifu needs to give it everything they've got, because it's going, like, this race is going to be decided by these pit stops and whether Naifu can get past then Kevin and Hisham on their worn tyres in the closing stages. – 14 laps to go here. And let's see how that gap to Greg is evolving as he reaches. The gap is holding station at 19.8 seconds. So if Naifu has a slow stop, then they will be right. They're going to be coming out of the pits right next to where Greg is. And whether Naifu gets a podium or not, whether Naifu can win this race, might be dependent on where. This is a very important gap to keep watching. It's currently very slightly down, but it's still really 19.8. Chris R, 22.2 seconds behind, and I think that's critical for Yui. Needs a 20-second gap over him. Ideally, Yui needs a 20-second gap over Greg as well, but I don't think that's really... Of course, Naifo and Yui will have less fuel to put in at their pit. So you would expect them both to have much quicker pit stops than what we've seen from the one-stoppers, Kevin, Hisham, and Greg, who all did, with the exception of Greg, they all did pit stops of more than 8 seconds. You would expect it to be more in the 6 rate. That difference could be critical. Every second is definitely going to count here. Matthew stays out. We're expecting these two to quite soon. I would be surprised if they leave it later than lap 30. Here is Kevin for the Dancing Donkey. He's running in 3rd place right now. The 2 drivers in front still have to stop. Kevin pitted around half distance, so it's a reasonable assumption that he'll stop again. So we are looking at Kevin as our net leader, and he's going to have at least a 10-second advantage over Naifo. Getting past Greg, with Greg making that mistake earlier, has turned out to be critical, because Kevin is now 12 seconds ahead of Greg on basically the same strategy. That overtake could perhaps have been a race-winning overtake. Kevin started from 10th on the grid, and if he does win here, that would be the lowest ever starting grid position to win here at Monaco in the main Formula I event. And he still, despite his heavy fuel load, despite perhaps needing to save those tyres, he's still closing down the gap on those front 2. But of course, he's now in the same position that Rory was. Not quite as credible a position. Rory was 15 seconds ahead with no more stops to make. But as long as Kevin doesn't make a mistake, as long as Kevin doesn't let Naifo and Yui pass, and they'll have to get past Hisham first, so it's not certain that they'll even catch at all. As long as he doesn't let anyone pass, he has the win in the bag. It's always easier said than done, isn't it? Naifu's lead over Yui, 3.7 seconds. I'm very surprised that neither of them are pitted yet. Perhaps we have to ask the question, did they put enough fuel to get to the end with their pit stops? I think it's unlikely, but at this point, maybe. Their pace hasn't been amazing relative to the one-stoppers, which perhaps implies that they have more fuel than we thought. Is it possible that they fuel to the end? It's a long way to get the about. They seem to be managing all right for now. But if they don't have to stop like we think they do, then that changes things completely. Naifu's gap to Greg is an increasingly uncomfortable 18.9 seconds. 13 cars still running here as we reach 3/4 distance. It's quite a high retirement rate, but nothing unusual for Monaco. All of the drivers that have gone out of the race, they will still score points, of course. Not nearly as many as they would have been hoping. Keir and Tom D come in for their second stop. I'm expecting this to be a short pit stop, but it is going to be relative to him. If that's an incredible pit stop from Keir, that's 5.8 seconds. And Keir does emerge from the pits ahead of the bridge driver, and they are both ahead of Stewart's Red Leicester. So 10th and 11th for Keir and Tom D. Naifu still going. 9 laps to go. Still not coming into the pits. So, is it going to be then that the bridge driver and the Blue Bulls driver, Naifu and Yui, do not have to stop again? It's looking increasingly possible, isn't it? I didn't think that anyone could go from about lap 15 all the way to the end. I think that's when they pitted. Time to go, to be honest. It was around there. Given that they didn't have especially long pit, you never know. It's looking increasingly likely that those two won't have to stop again. In which case, Kevin is going to have to use his fresher tyres, relatively. They're not fresh at all at this point. He's been going on them for more than 10 laps. But he'll have to... So it's Naifu who continues to lead this round. 2.2 seconds now. The gap is still coming down. Yui in second place. Third place, Kevin for the Dancing Donkey. A team that have never got, and a driver that have never got podium before. I was pretty sure that these two were to stop again. It's looking like they don't. It's looking like Naifu and Yui put a very heavy fuel load in their pit stops. And it seems to have worked out for them. All they need to do is defend their positions on the track as this race closes down. If there's any track where you can hold off a car on much better tyres, it's here. Kevin was closing in on these two by about a second a lap, but that's not nearly enough of an advantage to give you an easy overtake here. probably going to come down to whether Kevin can pressure these two into one mistake. And they're now covered. Half second. Here's the battle for 6th place. Chris R against Michael. Michael's been quite close behind for a while now, but never really close enough to challenge. These two are 25 seconds off the lead. Hasn't been an incredible race for Michael in that new Affoniere car, though it's looking much better for that team than they were doing last season. Just 11 cars still running, only half of those with 4 laps to go. Yui has got that gap to Naifu, under 2 seconds. Can these two hold on to claim their best ever results in Formula I? Yui has had a 2nd place before, so this would match her best ever result. Naifu has never won a Formula I race. They did lead several times last season, most notably in the first Brazil race, but in the very slippery and wet conditions, they sadly crashed out. We're holding quite a significant lead over Matt, if I remember correctly. And Kevin has never got a podium in Formula I before. 4th place, Hisham for Free Me My G, and I believe that would be his best result in Formula I as well. 5th is Greg, our defending champion. And I think he would be alright with 5th place. Like, his main rivals from last season, Izzy and Alba, either behind him or out of the race. So we close down to the end of this race. Naifu leads, 2 seconds, 3 laps to go. Top 4 covered by 8 seconds, but of course overtaking is so hard here. I've seen a few overtakes in this race, but not really looking like any of the 3 are getting close enough to each other to have a go. Indeed, Kevin seems to be falling off Yui at this point. Here to get for 9th, so let's have a look at that. So here it is. Keir, just less than 4 tenths now behind Callum. They've got very fresh tyres. I think Callum's also 1 or 2 stop, to be fair, so Callum's are pretty good as well. These two are probably closing in on Izzy at a very rapid speed. They actually aren't. It's a surprise, given that Izzy pitted quite a lot earlier. Of course, these two, considering that these two are racing each other, they have to, like, Callum's got to be constantly looking in his mirrors, wondering whether and where Keir is going to have a go, and that just makes you a bit slower than when you've got your full attention on what's going on in front of you. They are catching Izzy, but not nearly good enough. Heading at the 9th place in the closing stages of the Monaco Grand Prix. 2 laps to go. Naifu lead, 2 seconds ahead of Yui, 3.5 seconds ahead of Kevin. 8 seconds back is Hisham in the Free Me My G. This has been a very strong drive from Naifu. Got past Steven in the pit stops, played it safe early on, didn't take any risks, didn't really look like they were trying to get past the cars in front. Of course, it turned out they didn't need to. They all broke down, one by one. Steven out with a technical problem. Rory crashing out. As we've had another retirement, it seems. It's Michael in the Affoniere. Disappointment that has not won in quite a long time. Well, he was never going to win here, the pace that this car had, but it would have been good to see Affoniere get a good result. They're not going to do that today. And now we are down to just 10 cars still running. As they start the final lap, Naifu leads by 2 seconds. Yui not able to reduce the last bit of that gap to Naifu. And yeah, it's been a flawless race from Naifu, really. Their pace has not looked like they've not looked like the fastest driver on the track at any point, but that's not always how you win the race. Sometimes you've just got to do the right strategy, keep it on the track when others don't, and the race will come to you. Happened to have a few gets away with it, and really pretty sure that Naifu has this all under control with 2 corners left to go. As Naifu comes through the final corner onto the start-finish straight, Naifu will win the Monaco Grand Prix for Bridge. And what a well-deserved win it is. 2.5 behind, Yui matches her best ever result. And in 3rd place, taking his first ever podium finish, it's Kevin for the Dancing Donkey. 4th will be Hisham. 5th, our defending champion, Greg. I think you'll be happy with that result. 6th is Chris R. 7th is Izzy, who has closed up on him a lot in the closing stages, but it's a bit too little, too late for her. The gap is down to less than with a unable to get past Callum in the end. And 10th will be Matty for Pentaboron. Not a good race for them. Is Naifu, who wins the Monaco Grand Prix for Bridge. 240 points. And that is a very strong start to her campaign for the championship. And I think Naifu and Yui, who had a very strong season last time in qualifying, but consistently made mistakes or things went wrong in the race, well, this is exactly the start of the season that she needed. This has been Season 9 Formula I Monaco Grand Prix. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.